Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this Globinar entitled Fieldwork in African Archaeology and the Diaspora. Is a decolonized methodology possible? Today, joining us in a conversation is a panel of leading experts in several aspects of African archaeology, including fieldwork. And we are going to be having, hopefully, a very fruitful conversation. And to begin with, we have Professor Akin Ogundiran, who is the Chancellor's Professor at the University of North Carolina, and he is also the Editor-in-Chief of the African Archaeological Review, and a very senior Africanist archaeologist. Akin, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So we would like to start the conversation by just gathering your thoughts, because you have a very interesting career, having done fieldwork in North America and also in West Africa and the other parts of the world. So the question that we have for you is that archaeological field methods are by their nature extractive, right? In your experience with directing projects in different parts of the world, is there anything that can be done to decolonize fieldwork? Over to you.
Thank you, Shadrach, for that question. And good morning and good afternoon or good evening to all of you. I'm going to answer that question in a kind of a roundabout way, and I'm going to get to that question. First, what is Colonia in archaeological method? After all, our methods, survey, excavation, stratigraphy, laboratory work, they're all science. So what is Colonia about those? Well, we know that science is a hegemonic system of thought, practice, and control. That is why we're here. We all recognize that. Hegemony claims neutrality. It doesn't have any smell. It doesn't have color. It doesn't have any agenda. It doesn't have any identity. Now, those who hold the reins of power want you to believe those things. And the unconscious, on whom power is exercised, believes it, right? But we all have to recognize one thing, that all of us in this Zoom room, we are all colonized in one way or the other. We are children of colonization. We are children of imperialism. Decolonization cannot happen unless we are conscious of our post-colonial condition, right? Which is I call colonialism in autopilot mode. It is the highest state of colonialism, in which the colonized natives even internalized the norms of their colonial state. So the language we use, our way of thinking, our political system, our food, health, water, air, aspirations, they are all in the zone of colonization. So we must therefore start from this premise that decolonization is not an easy task, because the colonial condition has become the natural state of being. So this realization brings some level of humility to this. And I want to give a shout out to those of our pioneers, as well as some of whom have become ancestors, like Basianda, and those who are still, kicking and doing very great things. Peter Schmidt, Peter Gallic in Ife, in Zimbabwe, and Star. Many of them have, and there are many more, they have been wrestling with these questions. And so I'm happy that we are also trying to answer that question. Now, let me give an example. Now, the labor and efforts and time required to decolonize are enormous. It is easier to learn isotope analysis than to learn sonar. And it will take less time to master laser ablation techniques than to master Yoruba epistemology about materiality. So you can see how challenging this is. That doesn't mean it is impossible. And now I don't think there's any archaeology department in the world that is teaching a course on the African philosophy of time, space, and matter. Mm-hmm. And I don't know of any. And therefore, there's none that makes it compulsory. Now, that is what we do, right? As archaeologists, we are interested in the question of time, space, and matter. We are supposed to make these things up when we go to the field. And a Yoruba proverb says, "Imu lalejo fi rina." That means a stranger can only use their nose to see. Mm. Because when you're a stranger, you're in a place, you are lost. You don't know their ethics. You don't know their morality. You don't know their values. You are making it up. So if all you can do is you use your nose to see, instead of using it to smell, you can, of course, imagine what the product will be. Mm-hmm. But a stranger that has power and hegemonic tools will see what they want to see. And the native is socialized to believe it, because that is what hegemony does. The hegemony disciplines decolonize to see what those who hold up those tools want to see. But what I'm driving at is that decoloniality is more than a critique of what colonialism has done to us, the post-colonies. It is also a critique of what post-coloniality has reduced us to, which is dependency. So we are having this conversation in the middle of disenchantment, right? In the world, not just in Africa, all over the world. We are seeking for a better way of life. We are seeking for social justice. At the same time, we see a widening gap between the state and society. The society's goals are not aligned with the interests of the state. You know, in some parts of Africa, we also have what I would call indolent leadership that doesn't think much. So we are having this conversation in the middle of all of this. So let me then get back to the question, is there a colonial methodology in archaeology? So what is it? What are the colonial legacies of archaeological method? The landscape we study is not a stable landscape, right? And the community we study is not singular. We are talking of usually multiple overlapping and conflictual communities, sometimes with different interests. Sometimes the work we do is incompatible with the interests of the host community, especially in the volatile politics of the state. Sometimes the descendant community may be lukewarm even towards our decolonial agenda, because they might see it may get in the way of their own particular interest. And that is okay, because heritage is political. And the story of the past is politically configured. So it would be dishonest or naive to think that we can study or imagine the past in a political way. I was involved in a project in North Carolina here, Old Westview Cemetery, some years ago, talking about, and this is one example where it is very easy, because you have a community that is unified about its past, and that is the African American community. Given the legacies of slavery, redlining, and all forms of racism going on in their world, they were united to protect this cemetery, which has fallen into disrepute. This is very common in many US or old urban centers, where you have African American cemeteries being bulldozed. People are abandoning those places, but this community came together and said, no, we want to protect this site. Now, the instinct that an archaeologist will have, of course, yes, let's go in there and do excavations and study the earth and their diets going back to the mid 19th century when this cemetery was established. But what I did was different. I decided to rally my students and the community, first of all, to go and clean up the cemetery. It's a very simple thing, to clean it up. And we offered our service to survey the cemetery, to map it out, because the goal was to nominate it to be included in the National Register of Historical Places, right? So we cannot nominate it in a kind of a rowdy state it was. So we rallied the community. but that really generated interest in the public space. The journalists became aware of what we were doing, and they joined us. They came and publicized that event. But that event now laid the groundwork for the nomination, which became successful on April 29, 2015. It became member of the National Register of Historical Places by the US Department of the Interior. So the goal there was not to study the people. There are other ways we can study the lives of those people. We don't have to excavate the site. And I insisted that, we are not going to do any excavation here. We're just going to survey and map it out and know. So many of the headstones have fallen, or many of them did not have headstones, because these were enslaved people. Some of them were enslaved people. Some of them were working class people. They were just buried there. So this is one way in which I've been involved in this way, in this process of introducing a different, very simple, but a decolonized way of looking at the past. So another point I want to make is that
are you able to wrap up in the next minute or so that you can
yes.
come back into the conversation?
Yes, I'm going to do that. Now, another point, the second example I want to use is that when we look at the way we archaeologists think about sites, there was a particular site I work in Osogbo. I spent about 2 years, with all my scientific survey methods. But I did not start talking to the people about how they use their landscape. Of course, my scientific methods failed to identify the sites that I was looking for. It was when I realized that the movement of the people on the landscape itself is a way that could have shown me how the past was configured. It was at that time that I began to see what I was looking for. So there are ways in which we as archaeologists need to pay attention, therefore, to what is going on around us, instead of just coming in with our tightly defined methods. So the last point I'm going to make is that stratigraphies do not have to be vertical. They can be horizontal, right? And any society that you can study with stratigraphy only is a colonized society. And if you insist that stratigraphy is the only way to study that society, you are either a colonizer, or worse, you are gullibly appropriated into the colonial project. So how do we recover stratigraphies that are in dances, in rituals, in oral traditions, in movements, in mythologies, in order to have a more robust understanding of the past? These are some of the simple and direct ways in which we can begin to decolonize our methods. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I hope we will have some questions. And at this point, allow me to bring in Helena Waldekiros into the conversation, who, like yourself, is based in North America, but also works in a different part of Africa. So Helena, welcome. But based on your experiences in the Horn of Africa, and also North America, as I mentioned, what from your experience can be done to make archaeological fieldwork more sensitive to the concerns and aspirations of host communities to recover those multiple stratigraphies that Akin was sketching? Over to you, Helena.
Thank you so much, Professor Shetrick. And it's going to be really hard to follow Professor Akin's analysis, and I'll try my best. But again, thank you for inviting me. I've been coming to so many of your Globinars, and I'm really happy to be part of it today. So before answering your question, in thinking about this panel and the question, I was thinking about the ways that our archaeological fieldwork is still colonized in Africa or North America. And I was coming up with a list. I'm not going to go through all of the lists, but I'm going to focus on 2 of those areas I think are very important to talk about and how to solve them. And, as Professor Akin said, it's very, very hard to decolonize archaeology, but I'll try my best to come up with some suggestions. So the first category, or area that I think needs really A lot of work is in the research design itself, how research is done either in Africa or in North America, in indigenous land or within local communities. Research is usually designed to fulfill to the interest of a larger political economy of the researcher's institution or grant giving agencies. So the problem here is that local communities and indigenous communities are completely disconnected with the fieldwork or the research design. There's no consideration of local indigenous knowledge or interest of local communities about type of history or research that needs to be done in that specific area. And Professor Akin nicely put it, again, in Africa, within just a small area, you find, different cultures, people speaking about 80 languages only within Ethiopia. And so we have to be sensitive about those diverse political history and culture and knowledge of the area we're studying. So this area, I think, is the main area that needs attention. And the way to go about, again, including indigenous or local knowledge is to, make a big, change or to break barriers, be willing to acknowledge that there are different ways of knowing and thinking. Besides Western ontologies, there are different types of local ontologies, either looking at, as Professor Akin said, about ecology, diet, religion, all sorts of topics. And there are some examples of non-local or non-indigenous communities trying to do this for those people who say this cannot be done. I can give examples of colleagues like Catherine Widman-Arthur, who published a book on the social lives of stone tools, looking at the Gamo people. And she tried to incorporate the ontologies of the Gamo people in her interpretation. There are a few others like Matthew Curtis, who tried to center the Africans in the archaeology. The other problem with fieldwork and research design is always taking the agency of indigenous people or local people from the history itself, always, emphasizing the role of the other in terms of, introducing new types of domestic species or architecture, always, taking agency from local communities about even the history itself. The other thing about fieldwork and research is that after publication, after discovery, local communities are in complete, darkness about what came out of the site. So I think the best way to address this kind of problems is also to translate publications in at least one local or two local languages and share findings with local communities. And just, to save time, I will move on to the second problem, I guess, in terms of looking at fieldwork is, the individual researchers' interaction with local communities, either people living near the area or, local scholars working with them. Is this hierarchical relationship that does not consider, local cultural norms. For example, I'm based in anthropological archaeology, so we do a lot of ethnographic or ethnoarchaeological work as well. And there are some questions that are culturally inappropriate and offensive to communities. I think being sensitive to those things is important. Researchers, when they go to the field, like Professor Akin said, they get trainings in different methodologies like isotope, morphological analysis, but then they never get training about how to work with local cultures, right? They need, I think, similar training in terms of, cultural sensitivity and even political history and local ways of, doing things. So I'll stop here and I'll be happy to come back to this point.
No, thank you so much. I have always said to myself, if I am to develop a new interest in archaeology, it has to be decolonizing fieldwork in Ethiopia so that I can work with the coffee farmers. You see, that would be
that would be wonderful.
So, but you raise some very pertinent questions, and I want to shift the conversation to Dr. Elenaza Mjema, who is the head of department at the University head of department of archaeology at the University of Dar es Salaam. Welcome and salam alaikum. What is very interesting?
Thank you so.
Oh, you
Yes,
thought I don't speak Swahili.
Thank you for welcoming me. Actually, I'm very happy.
Okay, fantastic.
Yes, Karibu Mwalimu, do you have a question, or I can just go on?
No, yes, I have a question. I have a question for you, and I want to just make the point that the issues raised by Akin and also raised by Helena, particularly in terms of the local languages, right? Can we do fieldwork in our local languages? Akin had that very nice Yoruba proverb, can you see with your nose? So you have a very interesting position in that one can say that you perform fieldwork in your own community and you are fluent in Swahili. That's why I was talking to you in Swahili, right? A language that is spoken by the communities where you work. So is it easy to decolonize archaeology for you? What lessons for decolonizing fieldwork can you share? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor. Actually, it's very difficult to decolonize archaeology just because of that. Actually, in my conversation, I will focus on first of all, I'm Swahili speaker. I'm also archaeologist, a researcher doing Swahili archaeology. But at the same time, the society I'm searching, I'm investigating, they all built on traditions, which is Swahili. But at the same time, the community themselves are Swahili. But you can imagine that the community themselves sometimes are not even interested in what I'm doing. This is really very difficult to decolonize. Why? Because the problem comes because of the language we are using. I mean, actually, at the time of the field work, we are sometimes engaging the local people, and we use Swahili throughout. But when it comes to writing, we write it in English or in the other languages. And this is at that moment, everyone goes in his own way. So when we're in the field, maybe in the morning, we are doing all together, the communities where we're excavating, but we're in the evening. I'm a Swahili researcher in my laptop, and the communities, they don't know what's going on after that. So there is a problem of language. And for us now, we are happy that Swahili is becoming the working language for African Union. So it's becoming a very recognized language spoken by many nations. So probably we can start writing some field methodology in Swahili, and this can start from the university. The problem here in Tanzania is that we have the education background whereby till the primary schools, you do Swahili, and then when you go to secondary or advanced secondary schools, you do English, and then you go to university where you do all studies in English. So when you go back to the communities to investigate, so you investigate them not in Swahili, but also you investigate them in this different Eurocentric kind of mindset. And so I would think that to bridge that gap, we need to start from probably from university, which is very difficult to translate all those terminologies because the archaeology itself is it has a very deep background, and I don't know how we can go about transforming all everything's methodology into Swahili lexicons. So there is a problem, which I see that the question itself is very, despite the fact that I'm a Swahili researcher, investigating the Swahili archaeology, but it's very difficult to transform that knowledge I'm investigating to the communities. What you can do with the output we are having now to translate them into simple books, pamphlets to send to the community. So this doesn't help. So I think if we want to decolonize the Swahili archaeology, the Swahili fieldwork methodology, then it's a big thing. I mean, it's not a small thing as I can discuss here. And so I feel I see a challenge because, for example, the Swahili Society themselves, where I do my research, they have a long history, and they have a long history since the let's say 2,000 years ago. And at the time when the English came, the Swahili was there. And if we investigate using any language which came probably 19th centuries, the Swahili themselves, they don't understand what you are looking for. You know, so they are probably, if we investigate those what we are investigating using Swahili and using Swahili community themselves, they can understand what you are looking for. So normally the knowledge we are producing is just for promotions, for publication, international journals, and become professors. But then when you look at the community themselves, they are so much alienated. And sometimes I used to have this public archaeology. After I do my research, I just go through, when I go to excavate, I pass with this shovel and this trowel, and they don't know what I'm looking. So I had a program to go to schools or to call some elders and tell what I'm doing. And one elder, probably now the late, and was telling me in Pangani that what you are investigating is not what you are looking for. And we know a lot. You should not have done all what you are doing. Just ask us. We can tell you everything on what you are looking for, because I projected my PowerPoint there showing the history of Swahili, 15th century, and they say we know everything. What you are telling us, we know everything. You should not have. So I didn't know how to get that knowledge, because I'm not training on how to get knowledge from the locals, but at least I'm trained to do excavation, study stratigraphy, and I really have a little bit of oral tradition from communities. So what I can say that the Swahili language, if everything is turned into Swahili, and it's not only in archaeology, maybe the university can have this program of translating all these books, and it's very difficult. For example, excavation. We don't have a Swahili word for excavation. Because in Swahili, if you want to tell someone we are going to excavate, you have to say you are going to dig. And the digging is quite different from excavations. So there is this problem. If you tell, you explain to someone that well, we are going to, so it's like digging some holes, and it's not about anything. So there is there is a lot to do in terms of finding, fine-tuning the archaeology we are doing to match with what the expectation of the communities. So that's what I have for now.
Thank you so much. It is very important and interesting that we are all raising the same vital things: excavation in Kiswahili, stratigraphy in Kiswahili. How do we do archaeology in our own languages and in our own ontologies? Very, very, very powerful. But allow me to bring in Jane Humphreys into the conversation. And Jane, hello, and so very nice to see you. I have a question for you, which is a little bit unfair, I accept. But because I'm your friend, perhaps I have the right to ask a very unfair question. But here is the question. You are the director of the British Institute in Eastern Africa, and you have done remarkable, great, phenomenal work in terms of engaging with the communities and your work in student development, you know, funding radiocarbon dates for those who could not afford them. Very powerful, right? But the British Institute in Eastern Africa is one of those institutions associated with colonialism, right? But at the moment, it is making vital contributions in the post-colony. What are some of the decolonial approaches that you can share? Because it seems that you are now doing a lot of great work, you know, but then there's the contradiction that is associated with the history, the birth of the BIEA. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Shadrach, and thank you for giving me advanced warning about this question. So I've been able to prepare, and I hope I can address these concerns. So the BIEA was founded in 1960 during the colonial period. And since then, it has relied heavily and continues to rely on British government funding via the British Academy. We are one of 8 so-called BIRI, so British International Research Institutes, along with organisations such as the British School at Rome, Council for British Research in the Levant, British Institute at Ankara. So it is perhaps unsurprising that those unfamiliar with the work that the BIEA do today may well associate us with a colonialist institution. But these days, from our hub in Nairobi, where we provide one of the best stock libraries in the region, as well as research facilities, including equipment and vehicles and events and research spaces that are open to everyone, we work to conduct, support and facilitate research across the humanities and social sciences across Africa. And it's imperative for the BIEA that our intellectual agenda is rooted in African scholarship so that we're a legitimate and robust participant in equitable knowledge production. And the research environment that we continue to develop is lively, dynamic, and inclusive. And this is nurtured partly via the partnerships that we encourage at the BIEA. So, for example, several other organisations are housed with us, such as the Rift Valley Institute, IFRA, the German Collaborative Research Centre, we have UCL's Prosperity CoLab, and our most recent collaborative venture, which is with the University of Oxford's Refugee Study Centre, the result of which is the Refugee-led Research Hub. And in addition to these organisations, we have numerous partnerships with universities and research organisations across Eastern Africa and beyond. And this places the BIEA at the heart of a collection of organisations, each actively dedicated to and spearheading a decolonised approach to scholarship in Africa, while learning with and from each other and maximising the opportunities afforded through such close working relationships. So we're collectively and actively seeking to promote a decolonised research ecosystem, benefiting from the development, discussion and dissemination of excellent research and from opportunities to learn from each other's approaches and insights. So what are we actually doing? What do we physically do about this? Well, first of all research supported by the BIEA, no matter who is leading that research, has to be accredited, has to be approved by an accredited institutional ethics review board. So all of the research we're associated with has gone through that process, which is really important to us. We support researchers at all stages of their careers based at universities in Africa, the UK and beyond in a variety of ways. So for example, we have thematic grants, writing grants and dissemination grants. And most of the grants we have these days are given to Africa-based scholars. Our undergraduate volunteer program and our one-year postdoctoral research fellowships are created for African academics. And our graduate program is largely comprised of African graduates these days. Our training courses are developed based on the specified needs of our members. And these days, one surprisingly positive impact of COVID is this desire to hold events online, which of course makes them much more accessible to wider communities. A good example of one of our training courses is our year-long Introduction to Research Processes course that we're currently running, where every month we deal with a different aspect of the research process and deliver multiple lectures by some of Africa's leading researchers to audiences of 200 plus, largely based on the African continent. The Nairobi Hub is run by our Kenyan country director and overseen by our Kenyan board. And our staff body includes African researchers and Kenyan technical experts who are funded to participate in the highest level of training. I should also mention that our new website is available in English and Swahili, which we were really keen to make sure we could do. So despite the name and despite relying on British government funding as we do, I believe as an organisation we are working towards a decolonised mode of operation, but we do know there's still an awful lot we can do. And this is under constant review, both in Kenya, in the UK, and with our partners around the world.
Wow, thank you so much. That is very important. And I hope when we are in the Q&A, you can be able to elaborate on some of the initiatives that you are doing. So the question is, what's in a name? So yes, founded during the colonial period, but the work that is being done, the thrust is certainly decolonial. But because you are not partnering with the School of Archaeology in Oxford, the partnerships that you mentioned, they don't apply. Anyway, I'm joking. But at this point, I will come back to you. At this point, I would like to bring in Kate Grillo into conversation. Kate, how are you? I hope Florida is treating you nicely.
It's fantastic. Thanks so much for inviting me to this conversation.
Okay, great. I have a provocation for you, which is basically based on your profile as a leading archaeologist. You are both an active field worker. You know, you have excavated so many of those sites, and you are also an editor of a top African archaeology, in fact, a global journal, right? So from your experience, how much of the decolonial talk end up in publications? You know, from the beginning, we have been hearing some very good words, languages, and so on. How much of that end up in publications? And also, more importantly, have you had experience with publications or manuscript rather that breach ethics and rights of communities? And as editor, because of that stewardship role that you have, that oversight role, what did you do? Over to you, Kate.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I'm happy to get to these questions. So, you know, I've been asked to come in specifically as the general editor of the Journal of African Archaeology, which is a position I hold alongside my co-editor, Professor Ibrahima Chow. And Professor Agundra, and you know, please feel free to chime in with any comments from your perspective as editor of the African Archaeological Review as well. So yeah, so I think this is a good time to reflect on not just the steps that individuals, you know, particularly those of us from the global north, really must take in efforts to support decolonized archaeological practice in Africa, but also to reflect on the structural barriers that continue to stand in the way of progress. And many of these have been discussed in previous Globinars as well. I'd say the publishing industry as it currently operates is in many ways one of those barriers. Most of the high impact archaeology journals, including many of the journals focusing specifically on African archaeology, are published either in America or Europe. We have some great Africa-based regional journals, and I promise to come back to those at the very end. But for others, you know, editorial decisions, except at AAR, are very often, if not most often, made by non-African scholars. And I acknowledge my own contribution to this particular problem. Editorial boards, you know, tend to comprise mostly European and American scholars still, and thus publishing power really is concentrated outside of African universities and other institutions. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise to anybody that at least at JAA, African scholars are a minority amongst our published authors. And I don't think we're alone there. A few other concerns: publishing is generally free for authors. Open access fees remain prohibitive for many. Access to published materials remains highly unequal. English language hegemony in publication is another issue. Professor Njema, please think about sending me papers in Swahili. So one of the many reasons the status quo needs challenging and really is being challenged by lots of people, I think, is because these power structures, which are rooted in colonialist models for scientific research, often reproduce themselves in terms of the archaeology itself. So the types of projects that get funded, the field work that might not be rooted in deep community engagement and intellectual exchange, and ultimately the types of papers chosen for publication. So Professor Chirikuri asked me the following, from my experience, how much of the decolonial talk ends up reflected in publications? And my first instinct was to say hardly ever. It varies and it's becoming more common. I'll speak for myself here, but my feeling is that the best papers, the most rigorous papers, are the ones that result from really concerted efforts to reject extractivist models for archaeological research and embrace more creative and collaborative work, with the needs of African communities foregrounded. And works done by my colleagues here on this panel, I think today serve as great examples. Okay, I was also asked, have I as an editor had experience with publications that breach ethics and rights of communities? So thankfully my answer is not really, but I do have one question, particularly for archaeological teams coming from outside of Africa, regarding the perpetuation of colonialist fieldwork practices, which I think we can agree these still exist in lots of ways, in lots of places. Surely I personally am guilty sometimes. And the question is, at what point does failure to address those practices in any meaningful or measurable ways, when does that constitute a breach in ethics? And what can be done from a publishing perspective? Can some forms of accountability, be achieved during the review process, for example? I would hope so. But what would that look like? I would really like to hear ideas from people here. Steps are being taken by many journals that are really imperative, diversifying editorial teams and the ranks of scholars who serve as reviewers, for example. But there's still a lot to do. Try not to be too pessimistic here. Let's do it. I also really want to encourage our community to support and cite work in regional journals like the West African Journal of Archaeology, the South African Archaeological Bulletin, and others where some of the best discussions about decolonization and the future of African archaeology are taking place. So thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the issue of practices, it affects all of us. When I'm in South Africa or when I'm in Zimbabwe, I'm wearing a different hat. What happens when I'm coming from Oxford, going to Southern Africa? Does that make me an agent of the colonial system? I don't know. Those are some of the issues that we will hopefully unpack. And just to the audience, kindly post your questions so that the panelists can engage with them. But Kate, you raised so many interesting questions, and the issues about ethics fits very nicely into the interventions which Alex Kuhlman is going to make, because that relates to the moment where we are in at the moment, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the issues which it raises. So allow me to bring Alex into a conversation. And Alex, hello. I hope Johannesburg is treating you very well. Greetings from a very cold place.
Well, Johannesburg is quite wet today. We had a massive thunder shower most of the afternoon, so it's not quite hot.
No, fantastic. Then it means that the rain medicine worked. But anyway, I have a question that fits into the discussion that we were having with Kate, and this is also framed as a conversation. As a provocation. So here we go. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the inequalities between the global North and the global South. That's what colonialism in some cases was all about. So, however, we have witnessed that some fully vaccinated researchers from the global North, they continued and still continue to perform fieldwork in different parts of the continent, And in communities without vaccines, right? Differences in terms of access. Is this a sign that African archaeology will never be decolonized? Do you have any responses to this provocation? Over to you.
Thank you for the provocative questions, Shadrach. It started an email conversation between us, and so there's a history to this question. But before I zoom in and start to answer it, I would like to use and possibly abuse your platform by expressing solidarity with our colleagues at UCU who are on strike for, amongst other things, pension rights and decent pay. And I think that is something that all of us across the world are concerned about. And COVID has had an impact, certainly on how we perceive academic labor and the implications of it. So with that detour in place, I'm going to break up my fairly meandering response to your question into three. And so I'm going to start off just by a broad scale reflection on what I think decolonized research methodology should take into account. And then from that broad scale, I'm going to zoom in and set out 4 principles for what I think could be decolonized fieldwork. And then I'm going to zoom in specifically to your COVID fieldwork question. And so to kick off, I think old school colonialism and its modernist new colonial successors mesh place, race, class, gender, language, and various other things into their practice, which means for us to undo colonization, because for me that is what decolonization is about. We need to think about intersectionality both in our theory and our practice. Now, one of the past intersectional responses has been to advocate standpoint theory, and guided by this approach, the post-colonial feminist philosopher Sandra Harding proposed we use strong objectivity, which would make for better science by producing stronger standards for good methods that can guide competent research efforts. And so it's not chucking out scientific methodology, it's in fact saying at the moment they're not good enough. And part of the way that's done is through more reflexive practice and working for and from effective communities. This practice that Harding advocates is driven by a very clear scientific rationale, which is to develop better science, but there are also moral and political rationales involved in it. And I would argue that a decolonized archaeological methodology, especially one for fieldwork, similarly requires reflexivity and working from below. And so how could we do that? Many years ago, in I think about 2007, there was a special issue of the Journal of Archaeological Method and Theory that focused on feminist archaeology. And it was a response to critiques from, amongst others, women of color and indigenous feminists who critiqued the way that archaeological feminism had been practiced. And so in the introduction, Alison Wiley set out principles for doing archaeology as a feminist. And I'm going to take those and rework and repurpose them as principles to guide doing fieldwork that could help us to decolonize archaeology. The first is that our research should be guided by questions that are relevant to the people whose archaeology we work on and or the communities in which we work, or more generally to those oppressed by colonial systems of inequality. The second principle is that our work should be situated in the experience or experiences of those marginalized by colonialism in all its forms. The third is that our fieldwork should be accountable to our research subjects and all those who are affected by our research processes and its outcomes. And then very least, and the fourth one, is that decolonized fieldwork should not be in itself an exploitative practice. Now, I'm sure by now you've noticed that these 4 guidelines that I said I would set out do not include not putting the lives of the communities with whom we work at risk, or putting the people in the place that you work at risk. And I didn't include this, and neither have most of the other scholars who have advocated for decolonizing methodologies. And there's a very simple reason for that. It's because not doing harm is a fundamental ethical requirement for all research, whether involved in decolonization or not. And I think you have a sense where I'm going now. So with that in mind, my response to your provocation will be a bit of tap dancing where angels might fear to tread. And I think the fact that researchers from the global north continue to perform fieldwork in different parts of the continent and in communities with access to vaccines is not only an indication that we are nowhere near the decolonization of our field methodologies, which for me this is a clear indication, but it also tells me about the unsteady ethical foundations on which archaeological fieldwork in Africa still rests. And so frankly, if we cannot get the basic ethics in place, and that is not to people's lives at risk, I struggle to see how we will ever decolonize African archaeology. And with that, I'll hand back to you. And
thank you
later.
Thank you so much. And that has been terrific. Paul, do you want to say something in relation to what we have heard? Keep the questions coming, colleagues, keep the questions coming. Very soon we are opening up for questions, and I see we have a number here. But before we get to the questions from the audience, Paul, your quick remarks?
Thank you, Shadrach. And I'd just like to begin by thanking all of our panelists for providing such powerful and astute observations on a host of issues. And Alex's sort of concluding remarks, I think, are really, should be very much, in a sense, our starting point for, continuing conversations on how one effectively decolonizes a discipline. And archaeology sits, as we're all aware, in this sort of ambiguous space of being both the science of the colonizer, but also a powerful science for challenging many of the assumptions that underpinned European colonialism and European constructions of the non-Western other. And we have this constant tension about, and I think I know that I've experienced that throughout my careers, of what is it that I'm doing here on the African continent that can, if you like, do good. But I think it's also critical that we reflect on the point that Alex has reminded us of, that comes from Alison Wiley's observations, that it should also not do any harm. And maybe that's a starting point for us all to say, well, what harm might our interventions cause? And that harm is this is not just sort of, in a sense, physical harm, but it's structural harm, it's ontological harm, it's epistemic harm. And I guess one of the things that I feel that we have still got to grapple with, and maybe it's not come out, although there has been this great emphasis on the need to develop an archaeology in vernacular languages and founded on vernacular ontologies. I worry at times when we rightly push for community engagement, we rightly push for careful and close consideration of the indigenous knowledge. Elinaza tells us, the people in his study areas in Pangani told him, well, why didn't you just come and listen to us? And in a way, I think that's really a really important observation. But I do worry at times that we still have not quite managed to transform how we engage with communities in such a way that their knowledge, their understandings of the past, their constructions of history reshape our disciplines rather than being placed in contrast to archaeological knowledge. And I'd be really interested to hear from panelists their thoughts on how they might do that. Bear in mind, Spivak's observation about whether or not the subaltern can speak. So thank you.
Indeed, can the subaltern speak? But the first question that we have from the audience relates to the translation of published results. So how can we use translation of published results as a way of, as a decolonizing approach when most members of our local collaborators have never been to school? So what are the new ways? Can we do podcasts? Can we do the written word? What are some of the ways? Who want to go first?
Let me chime in a little bit here. Thanks to
go ahead.
Yes, that's a very important question. What I want to say is about diversifying in our own work, making sure we're catching or we are responding to the diverse communities that we work with. It's not just people in the area, in the local area that should be part of our audience. We should also tap into people in the cities, teachers, journalists. We need to kind of reach out to a diverse audience because we cannot do this work by ourselves. We need collaboration with the people who have different skills, people who speak different languages, but who can help us translate what we do into local languages. We need broadcasters who can record and share this. Everyone carries a radio around, or their iPhone, sorry, not radio, iPhone, or something that they hear from their phone. So irrespective of where you go in Africa today, people carry all this, and they listen to news in their languages. So even when they cannot read it, they can listen to it. So we need to reach out to different audiences who can assist us to get our stories to a larger audience, not just in text, but also in broadcasting. So that would be my recommendation.
But Akin, you provoked a thought in me. For you, as a very senior professor, right? It might work quite well. How about to myself? I'm just graduating with a PhD. Will I get tenure if all I do is produce a podcast in Shona? How?
Well, we all recognize the challenges of being young, with junior colleagues, what their departments value, or what we as a guild, as members of the guild system, including myself as a member of the guild, including you, Shadrach, as well as a member of the guild, when we receive tenure files, what we look at we look at the guidelines of the institution, and then we have to follow I think this conversation has to get into our institutions as well. This is not something, so we're having this conversation among ourselves as archaeologists of Africa. We also need to talk to our institutions about the future, the direction of archaeology, right? It is not just what you publish in top-rate journals that matter. It is also the legacy that you are building. Because if you do not start it young, I'm afraid when you become senior, you will not be able to do it. It's just, you don't just do it when you become a senior colleague. You start it when you are a junior colleague as well. So I don't think the race for tenure position should be based just on publishing in high rank journals. I think these things are not mutually exclusive. They can be done with publications. In fact, what is effective is that as you are publishing your article, you also have a product that caters to local interest. For example, in my own work, one of the things I usually do is I organize exhibitions. Not every year, but after 3 or 5 years of my work, I will have a photo exhibition. I will have something that people can interact with, irrespective of their language. The visuals of what we are doing, the story of what we are doing, we're able to communicate that with the local community.
Thanks so much. And the local community is now a global community. You can speak Yoruba in New York and someone can answer you. But anyway, Jane, I see your hand. Over to you.
Thank you, Shadrach. I completely agree with those comments. And I would also add that I think a challenge we all face is when it comes to funding. Too often when you apply to a big funding body to conduct your research, the idea of disseminating that research in innovative and diverse ways isn't incorporated into the funding application. And often there isn't a section where you can suggest that this is what you want to do with that fund. So we also, as archaeologists, need to perhaps think a bit more outside the box about where we can tap into money to do these things, because they can't, or they shouldn't necessarily just be add-ons that you do on your day off. You can create really great comprehensive community engagement strategies if you've got the funding there, for example, to pay a team to work through these strategies. So perhaps lobbying funding bodies to incorporate this into programs and trying to diversify our income streams is also something that can help us as we move forwards.
Okay, fantastic. And thank you so much. Keep the questions coming, keep the questions coming. Right. The other question says, non-Africans, despite being conscious of their contribution to the colonial character of African archaeology, still participate in propagating it. Why? Any takers? Helena, do you want to give it a go?
Yes, I can do it. Thank you for the question again. I think that's a very important question. And some of the panelists have mentioned that, archaeology is and then, African science discipline. And most of us local scholars working in Africa are trained outside Africa. But for me, as an Ethiopian, I feel like my identity actually transforms the way I do research and think about research when I go to the Horn of Africa to do research, or North America. I think there's a big difference because we are trained culturally, trained in our brain, in our conscious mind. We're part of the culture, we're part of the history of the land, and we bring that into our thinking and transforming research. So I think I see myself as taking advantage of my identity as an important aspect of doing this research. I also try to also highlight the important work that global North scholars, indigenous and African and Afro-Descent communities are doing. We have hopefully the organizers can post the link in the chat box. In 2020, I was able to be part of an amazing initiative with my colleagues at Rice University, with Mary Prondikas and Jeffrey Fleischer, and also Arizona State University, Catherine Ranhorn, in creating an open database, which is open to the public, which highlights work that has been done by African and Afro-Descent and underrepresented minorities starting from the 1930s. Publications that were, not highlighted in recent work, trying to give, exposure to underrepresented minority work in archaeology, so that their work could be acknowledged, but also to inspire young, new local scholars, indigenous scholars, that they can see themselves in archaeology, in the science of archaeology in the future, so we can have more, diverse community doing archaeology and bringing in different perspectives to the field. The other initiative I was able to be part of in 2020, again coming during pandemic and also during the global social movement that resulted from the days of George Floyd in America, is this William Leo Hansberry Society. We named it after William Leo Hansberry, who was the first African American to actually write about African history in the 1930s, 20s, when people didn't believe that Africa has any history to offer. So this community was organized by African Americans, Afro descent, and African scholars working in the diaspora. Our goal, again, this is a new initiative, a new institution. Our goal is to expose underrepresented minority to do field work in Africa, especially in topics that most Africans are excluded, like studying ancient Egypt, Nubia, Zimbabwe, Jano, all those early cities in Africa, those cultures that most underrepresented minorities are not even exposed to the history of those areas. So we're through our initiative, our education, field work, we're trying to do those kind of things. And I hope, again, that link will be on the chat box as well. I know this is a long answer to the question, but I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Auntie. Thank you for the information about these initiatives. It is good to see that a lot is already being done. And certainly that bibliography is also very important, because part of the decolonial project involves who gets used for teaching, right? What sources do you use for teaching? Who gets cited, right? And if those authors are not known, how can they be cited? How do they end up on the course outline at in Cambridge? In Harvard, in UCT, at the University of Zimbabwe, how many Africans are cited and so on. Do Africans even know each other in terms of who is doing what archaeology? So that bibliographic project that you guys worked on, that's terrific, that is great, and well done. This question is mostly directed to, I guess, Jane Humphreys. What do editorial boards and BIEA do to decolonize their work systems? So I see also Akin and Kate here, and I repeat the question. What do editorial boards and BIEA do to decolonize their work systems? How much of representatives percentage is in place for decolonizing publishing reviews? So the question is not, but I hope you got the gist of what the question is about. Who wants to go first? Kate?
Sure. Yeah, so in terms of the JAA, for example, we use the editorial board, the editorial staff routinely come together for advice about what to do in order to make sure that papers are being reviewed by the best people that can be reviewing them, by making sure that we can try to improve access to journal subscriptions and so forth at represented institutions in Africa, for example. To me, it's a way to bring minds together to brainstorm about ideas for ways that we can make things better. There's not a lot of turnover on editorial boards necessarily, and so I think that the fact that we don't have very many African scholars, for example, on the JA editorial board, it's recognized as a problem, and the question is, given the relatively glacial pace of change, how can we speed things up and give people real opportunities now, both in terms of serving in that role to give advice on editorial boards, serving as reviewers, serving as editorial staff. Those are things that we talk about constantly, but need to talk about more.
Fantastic. Akin, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I have the oddity of being a US-based African archaeologist and also being the editor-in-chief of African Archaeological Review. It's an oddity in many ways, but also an opportunity. What we do at AAR is that the editorial board is very diverse. We make sure that they represent some of the leading scholars who can provide advice to me and the associate editor about making decisions about every paper. But frankly, we rely on everyone, on all archaeologists of Africa, frankly, to assist us, because we receive manuscripts from human origins up to the present. So we have to make sure that our editorial board represent that interest, at the same time represent different geographies, and then we rely on reviewers. So one of the things that we did, apart from making sure that the editorial board is representative, is to make sure that African-based authors or African-based scholars have access to the journal. And the initiative we already have in place is that every institution in Africa actually has the opportunity to have access to the journal without the institution subscribing to Springer. We have that. And we also introduced a system whereby we know that Africa-based authors do not have the resources to have open access for their articles. So what we now do is I struck a bargain with Springer, the publisher of AR, to allow us to rotate articles by Africa-based authors to be available for 3 months at a time. That way, other scholars in the world can have access to their work, and therefore they can cite their work. So these are some of the initiatives that we put in place, but we also engage in mentoring of junior scholars who submit to AR. We try our best to work with other senior colleagues to make sure that sometimes it may take 4 times of resubmission, but I always tell them, say, if you just hang in there and continue to work on this, eventually you will get there. So we spent enormous time working with junior colleagues to make sure that who are based in Africa, because there's no reason doing that for those who are based here. They have resources for that, So we try to work with young colleagues to make sure that they get their papers out. So it may take long, but we try our best. So these are some of the initiatives that we have in place to make sure that, yes, I like Kate, I agree that the number of, those who are submitting to the journal, who are getting published in our journals, they tend to be in the global north. That is the fact. It's because that is also where the resources are the most in terms of research grants to generate papers. So I have another comment on that, but I don't want to take all the time. Maybe I will talk about that later, what we can do to solve that problem.
Okay, no, fantastic. And that's great. I get the moral of the story of what you said is that given that I'm temporarily based in the global north, because I can't benefit from the mentorship, I need to go back to Africa. Then you can look at me.
Yes.
But, on a more serious note, and then moving on, in order to decolonize our fieldwork practices, we also need to also tackle and decolonize the funding streams and who has access to Western funding applications. So I guess this is a comment, which is also related to the fact that, if you are based in Africa, you have no access to the NSF, you have no access to ERC, and then with no resources, that becomes a little bit challenging. Paul, do you have any comments?
Well, actually, too, I'd just like to correct you. Everybody, people based in Africa certainly have access to the ERC. That has been one of the great features about the European Research Council funding, that is open to everybody. What you have to do is to identify an institution within Europe that is ready and willing to host you and to work with you in the preparation of the grant and the application to make sure it's competitive. But yes, I mean, it is a huge challenge, and many of us who sort of work on the African continent but are funded by research councils in the global north constantly face challenges whereby it is the internal rules of those organizations that prevent us from, for example, none of the research councils in the UK will fund a PhD studentship. And the reason for that is because the PhD studentships are funded through a different mechanism, also by the research councils, but not, you cannot apply for put in a grant and put in a fund money for a PhD studentship, much as many of us would love to. And again, the Marie Curie ITNs offered by the European Union were a mechanism precisely to do that. So yeah, the issue is how do we change funding structures? And of course, it's public money, and research councils will always be subject to pressure, and this is particularly acute in the UK, I think, and has been since probably the financial crash in 2007, 2008, have been subject to political pressure. Whether it's UK money, it should be going to support research communities, and research that has direct benefits for Britain is a very, very common narrative voiced by our politicians. So I just wanted to put that out there. I mean, it's not I'm not attempting to offer an excuse, but perhaps a little bit of background to those unfamiliar with the funding regimes that are available.
No, thank you so much. And the point about the ERC is a good one. That's one instance where it has shown that being wrong can be a good thing, because you have now corrected me and then said, the correct procedures, and hopefully people will take advantage of that.
Yeah, and anybody listening to this call should be writing to you or to me or to anybody else in a European institution and saying, look, I've got a really great idea. Can we work with this?
Oh, fantastic. Even better. I see two hands, Ellie and Jane, but Ellie, if you allow me to abuse my position as chair, to rather ask you this question, because that's something that is just on the chat. Don't drop your hand, Jane. We will come to you. So the question is, should we work to transform universities, publishers, and journals in the global north? Or should we build alternative infrastructures based on the continent? Your thoughts, Ellie?
Yeah, thank you so much. This actually came, this question came right what I was trying to put forward. And thank you that from the preliminary, you say this is conversation, and you try to see how we can converse about it. First of all, I was a little bit alarmed with this global north, global south. First of all, probably we need to decolonize this division itself. Because I remember in 2014, we had this SAFA conference, and it was Archaeology Without Frontiers. And this actually, the aim was to see these divisions out. And I don't know how are we going to decolonize this, because if we keep on, yeah, it's a really terminology that you have global north and global south. And for me, I don't consider that, because I trained in German. I'm working in Tanzania, and most of the researchers you are doing research in Africa. Sometimes we are based in Europe, and in Europe we have funding. But in Africa, we have data and this kind of thing. So we have to reconfigure the issue, the word itself. Probably if we find a global one, I don't know, a single global thing, and we probably after 5 years to come, and we don't talk about global north and global south as far as the archaeology is concerned. And this is what I think we are going to decolonize this, because for me, it's like all these, my mentors, they are doing a great job in Africa. They trained us. And the movement we are moving now is like we have to move together. And probably if we decolonize this, sorry for repeating this, but probably you will help me on that. Decolonizing the word global north and global south as far as the archaeology is concerned. And this will be very useful because sometimes it seems that Global North is more of advanced, they have funding, but without Africa, where they have data, where all the data sometimes are collected, those funds cannot do anything. So it's a global one. Maybe we come with the concept of global one, archaeology without frontiers, and we work together and see how we can transform this, we can restructure this conversation of ours. For the question of universities trying to assist from Global North, because the terminology is not, I can't take it out because you have it now. Maybe if they transform some of the publications into Africa, some African language, this can be useful. I don't think if this will be useful. You know, if this is the end product, we cannot deal with the end product. If we, for example, the University of Dar es Salaam now, where I'm based, if we transform all the laboratory, all the library books into Swahili, this will not help. We have to start from the beginning, writing new books. And for example, the introduction of archaeology, it should be in Swahili or it should be in Shona. And this one should, whoever is coming at the University of Dar es Salaam should have this African archaeology. I remember one professor, one of the distinguished professor of ours, Professor, I don't know if I can mention, he wrote a book just for promotions here at the university. The book was in Swahili and it was about metallurgy. I read that book when I was in master's, so he recommended us to read that. But actually this delayed the promotion. But the very nice book in Swahili, but this delayed the promotion. And we knew that, and for us, we didn't even sometimes take into consideration read that book because we know the story behind it that he didn't get promotion out of it. So when he kept recommending students to read, they didn't take it serious because if the book didn't, but he tried as much as he could to make sure that this book goes to the communities and all. So I think writing, we have to start afresh. And not global north and global south. We have to be a global one. So this might take. Thank you
so much, which reminds me of the World Archaeological Congress and the One World series. Alex, I see your hand is up, but because the time is running out, I wonder if you would be in a position to try and get to this question. Scholars across all academic fields are working on decolonizing their discipline. What opportunities do you see for collaboration and solidarity across fields?
I mean, I think it's obviously that we need to collaborate, and I think there are multiple layers to that. So one relates to the question we've been discussing, which is resources. And so collaboration within Africa, amongst Africans from different disciplines, allows us to pool resources. And for example, fieldwork could be organized jointly with other colleagues working in similar areas or colleagues working in development studies. And so there are ways that collaboration on a purely practical level could be useful. But it's bigger than that, and it's bigger than pure practicalities, and it's ideological, and it's about challenging the way things work. And I think collectively as archaeologists and as all other scholars in Africa, challenging the way our governments use resources. So whether it's due to corruption, whether it's due to a range of other things, there are ways that African governments and African institutions can fund research in Africa. Sometimes they choose not to because their priorities are different. And I think that collaboration between different fields on that level makes a difference. But it also is about challenging international assumptions about what Africa is about. So Elena raised the question of Africa's got the data. Yes, we do, but we also have brilliant minds. We've got excellent researchers, and we have the ability to study our own past here. And so the idea that we somehow need the global north to come and study our past, I actually don't buy. I think it's a privilege that the global north has to study our past. And they build, and scholars from the global north and some parts of the south build their careers by using our data, by sometimes exploiting that data. And they build universities and they build university collections with our data. And those things make them famous. And so it's not that we have the, I mean, yes, we do have the data, but I think we've got a lot more. And I think we need to shift how we think about that relationship. And somebody from the global north coming to do research in Africa is not doing Africans any favors. Ultimately, they're building their careers. And I think we need to be cognizant of that. And I think cross-working with other scholars outside of archaeology sometimes is a strong reminder that the extractive nature of archaeology and how little gets put back. Back to you.
Thank you so much. Akin, if you can be as concise as possible. I have one last question that I want to ask Jane Humphreys before we close.
Okay, well, my point is that we are not going to decolonize our methodology when we do not decolonize our boundaries in Africa. We've created boundaries that make it impossible for someone in West Africa to talk to someone in East Africa, Southern Africa, so that we still operate colonial boundaries, and we always look north instead of looking across to one another, as Alex was saying. If we begin to make use of the talents we have in Africa, use brain circulation, circulate the brain. You know, when we circulate the brain, then we are going to begin the actual process of decolonizing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If I had known, I would have made that the last statement. But anyway, thanks for saying it anyway. Jane Humphreys, what about Pan-African funding landscape? What is being done to mobilize funding from African agencies, from the African Union to private donors? Part of that I could do, I could tackle it. I wonder if you have any responses in addition to what you wanted to say. The reason why I'm asking is because the British Institute has been involved with a number of projects, mobilizing funding, supporting scholars, and so on. So it's something that you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Shadrach. And thank you for that question, which is very important. Actually, what I was going to highlight is that the BIA does provide a variety of different grant opportunities that anyone, wherever you're based and whoever you are and wherever you are in your academic career, are very welcome to apply for. So in the coming months, tying into themes we've been talking about today, such as publications, disseminating our research back to the communities where we've been working, supporting newly qualified PhDs, we will be advertising for our writing fellowships, where you get a 3-month stipend to write a publication from your PhD, for example. We prefer if you'll submit to one of our journals, first of all. We have Azania and Journal of Eastern African Studies, but we can work with you to develop those papers. And we also have our dissemination grants, where you get money to specifically go back to your community, share your results, talk to stakeholders, develop future collaborative research ideas. So keep an eye on the grant opportunities that we have on our website, because, as I say, it's really free and open for all, and we want great applications from across the place. In terms of other funding bodies, I'm probably not the best person to speak on this. We are at the BIA always striving to develop opportunities for people. But Shadrach, if you've got some good ideas, I'll hand back over to you for that one.
Yeah, no. They absolutely. There are a number of private foundations, and what has been happening is that there are some of Africa's very wealthy families that are investing in archaeology and that are providing funding. So this Leventis Foundation in Nigeria, then there's also a couple of other people with private foundations in South Africa and so on. What we need to do is to open up the conversation and also to demonstrate that what we are doing can contribute to the challenges. So the work that Alex and colleagues have been doing about food security, is one of those very important things that normally have takers, which also leaves me with no time except to say that thank you so much. The comments that have been coming from the audience are quite overwhelming. So fantastic discussion. Thanks to the panelists, and the speakers are all raising valid points. We wish we could have continued and gone on and on, but unfortunately our time is limited. So with that, let me then just make the announcement that we are regrouping again in March, and the focus of the discussion then would be on African archaeology and its ability to tackle some of the contemporary challenges: climate change, food security, human rights, and so on. But we will circulate the details. And with that, allow me to thank the Oxford Africa Initiative, who are hosting us, St. Cross College, the School of Archaeology in Oxford, the University of Cambridge, Great Zimbabwe University, the Warner Grant Foundation, the Society for Black Archaeologists, the Pan-African Congress for Prehistory and Related Studies, and the Society for Africanist Archaeologists for making this possible. You do have a very wonderful and a very restful weekend. See you towards the end of March for the next Globinar. From myself and my colleagues on the panel, goodbye. See you here or there.
Thank you, Shadrach, and thank you, panelists.